Yeah.
Is that it?
I think that does it.
Rolling? Cool.
Oh, get your phone out so we can watch this.
Oh.
Oh, it's right up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Turn it off. Cool. Can you start? Hey guys. Hello. All right, well, let's get started. So this is Drupal 8, front-end tools of the trade. We'll kind of go through a lot of different topics, a lot of different scenarios. But the main thing I want to highlight starting out is these are the tools that we use at Acquia. Once again, we don't condone or not condone certain tools based on like personal preference. It's more project needs. So we'll definitely kind of go through the requirements and how we vet out our tools and things like that as we step through. So yeah. So yeah, quick introduction. My name is Jason Enner. I actually flew in from Atlanta a couple days ago to present, and front-end lead at Acquia. I've been at Acquia for 3 years and actually doing just Drupal development since 2007 and web development in general since 2001. So.
Hi, I'm Liz Mackey, and I'm mortified because Jason and I wore the same thing to the prom. But I'm an Acquia front-end developer too. I've been at Acquia for about 3 years, and I've been doing exclusively Drupal for quite a number of years now, starting as a site builder. But I started, I learned HTML in 1999, and it went from there. Yeah, go ahead. So we work on a whole bunch of different varieties of projects at Acquia, mostly enterprise. Can everyone hear me okay? And so here are 2 examples. I worked on Boston.gov, and Jason worked on Magic. So as you can imagine, a government site and a game site is they've got a lot of different needs and a lot of different functionality. And we need our build tools to be able to integrate with other things because we work with BLT, which is Acquia's build and launch tool. And we work with continuous integration, and we use various environments such as Drupal VM and Acquia Dev Desktop. And so we focus on baseline of tools for our best practices. But in addition to that, we know that all projects have different goals and different requirements. So we also want to be able to be flexible. And we also work with partners and clients of all kinds of different skill levels. So when we onboard a new developer who might be an entry-level developer, we need to have good documentation and a good sturdy tool set so that they can come on quickly and get up to speed. But also for more advanced developers that come onto projects, you know, they want to be able to extend things and make some of their own choices about tooling. So that led us to come to the following conclusions.
Yes, so at this point in time, we had a couple, I guess, light bulb moments, right? Like nothing really suited as far as the themes out there exactly the right combination. Because as I mentioned, and Liz mentioned, every site we do is such a custom element and has so many custom requirements based around it. So they're generally almost always enterprise level sites, but some are more geared towards like government compliance, where other ones are more like a brochureware that has API integration, things like that. So a lot of the requirements really pushed us to taking a look at several themes. We didn't really find anything that really matched universally across the board. So we said, okay, we need to just create our own starter D8 theme based on these requirements. And once again, this isn't a theme that we use on all our projects. We use on most of them just because of the familiarity with internally, and also we can also communicate that to partners and clients as far as best practices. So not only did we need like a way to start, right? We also need a set of tools, and by tools I mean a commonality that we can kind of go across the board as far as like this will be used on 99% of the projects, right? So there's a lot of things that you'll use on certain projects like browser sync and different things that we'll kind of get into in a second. But we needed something that was very common across requirements and that we could essentially just reiterate on and then talk as across the landscape of the project itself instead of like specific for the project. Cool, and that led us to create a new thing called Cog. So Liz, you wanna tell them?
Sure. So Cog is the base theme that we're using. It is, I kind of call it a non-theme because it's more based around our tooling. In our discussions when we were developing this, one of the things that was consistent across the board was each front-end developer, we had our own base themes that we liked, but what all of us did was we would install them and then start ripping stuff out. So, so we keep the theming and the templating to a minimum, and we focus mostly on what tools we think we're going to use on most projects or all projects, and then we can customize based on our specific project. And so Cog is something that's not, it's not necessarily going to ever be static. It's always going to be changing. As most of you know, whatever is trendy with front end, it's fluid, it changes a lot. And so we make choices as we go. We try to stick to things that are well adopted and well accepted for the reasons I mentioned, that it's an easier starting point and a way that people can get off the ground really easily. But an example of how it changes is that I'm on my current project, I'm using an older version of Cog. It's probably about a year old now. It's been a long-term project. And we decided we needed to use browser sync, which was added to the more recent version of Cog. So what I did, it was easy to just go in and take the code that's in our current iteration of Cog and just layer it in. But then as we were working on it, we hit a roadblock, which was that half of our team is using Drupal VM and half of our team is using Dev Desktop. So we have different local URLs. So the variable for the URL proxy is not consistent. So I added a flag to our Gulp task that we have a default because most people are using Drupal VM, but then you can also add in your own local by adding it in your command line. So we realized that this is probably going to be something that we're going to need across different projects. So now we're in our democracy that develops Cog, we're discussing, you know, whether that's something we now want to feed back into the project to use for other websites.
Cool. So this kind of brings us to just another quick pre-discussion as far as like before we get into the actual tools of how we vet our tools, right? So there's obviously with front-end development or development in general, there's a lot of opinions. And as they say, you know, everyone has an opinion and it's good to kind of stub out your own, but a lot of those are based on not only the background of what you're kind of used to, but also what the project has steered you towards or steered you against, basically. So we wanted to kind of take a look across all our projects, what makes sense for scenarios, whether it's like I mentioned before, whether it's government, whether it's, you know, something more expansive like a gaming site. It's something that we could really consistently use and that we're, you know, like 30% of the time not needing to rip out, you know, 15% of the time needing to add in. So we wanted something really consistent. Once again, this is a starter level. So after you're incorporating this, you're essentially stacking what you want to on top of it. So we'll kind of get to that as well. We have, you know, a pretty extensive list of things we usually stack on for specific projects. But we wanted to really look at, you know, the core commonalities and the patterns therein. We also wanted to really focus on efficiency. In general, right? Like obviously within Drupal, it's a whole nother beast because you're dealing within the kind of way we find CMS, certain processing system, certain pre-processing systems. And so we didn't want to just confine things to, what makes sense within Drupal, because, for example, I'm working on a project now that we're essentially using React on top of Drupal. So it's not as much of, okay, what makes the most sense within Drupal? It's, what is not only the new shiny thing, but what's the best fit for the project. So we didn't want to like handicap ourselves, so to speak, as far as like, what's, the most common thing in Drupal. We wanted to really focus on like global wide, the most common things in front end. We definitely kind of vet out things according to adoption and stability within the open source community. Things that not only have good traction, but we kind of forecasting, a year from now. I know even before with the Sass versus less years ago, where it was kind of like neck and neck. A lot of people put in time to less, and then it kind of, started fading out, and Sass started winning, and a lot of things and contributions refactor for whatever you're working on if you're kind of switching to that pre-process level. So we really kind of want to vet things out. Like all you guys, we're always down to check out the new shiny thing, right? But if you have to like re-engineer that shiny thing 6 months down the road, if you're talking to a partner team that has 10 developers and you're asking them to like pause what they're doing so we can, redo our new shiny thing, it obviously is causing issues as well. And will these tools play nice with our other build environments? Once again, we're just not focusing on front-end development. We're talking about front-end and task running within continuous integration, local build environments, Vagrant, VirtualBox, a lot of things like that. So are these things going to hold hands nicely? Is this going to cause issues? Or is there going to be a weird NPM container issue? We definitely vet out those things because we want to communicate across the line that this is the proper way to do it. And once again, it's not just internally, it's, for clients, for partners, and all these different skill levels. We don't want to have, for example, like a junior developer starts the first day, is stuck on our build tools, is freaking out, So we're trying to avoid things like that and trying to make things, very, very plain at the beginning, just so people feel ramped up enough to kind of extend upon it. So yeah, let's jump into our primary tools just real quick. Outline. So we're gonna kind of go through the primary tools and then we'll go through our secondary tools. These aren't tools, we're not opinionating these as far as like how strong the tool is, it's just the frequency of the use. So as we go through the primary tools, you'll see these are like very either popular, very common things, and the secondary tools are things that we probably are gonna use like not as often, but we use a fair amount. Also, as we're going through the format, we'll kind of explain quickly for those of you who don't know what the tool is, and then we'll really focus on like how we use the tool, right? So it kind of goes back to why are we looking at this tool and how is this really going to help us, instead of just saying, oh, I'm using this or I'm using this because this is the new thing. This is like truly how we use it and how we judge the value for using it to begin with. Cool. Start.
And just to mention, because I don't think we mentioned it before, Cog is available if you want to try it out. I think it's a really good starting point if you're new to some of these tools, because all of the code's right there in front of you and you can give it a try. So if you go to d.o, it's available. You can just search for Cog. So Gulp is our task runner, and it's modular. So shot up here that it's we've got a whole bunch of tasks that we're pulling in, for example, the browser sync one that I mentioned. So in addition to that, it's very easy since it's modular and you can add your own scripts, you can start tacking it on, add your own libraries. And so everything's broken out and it's easy to read through and find. And we're using it to do linting and our pre-processing. We process our Sass. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about
Gulp. Just one real quick thing to add. We broke these out intentionally, as Liz mentioned, in a very like modular way. So the intent is not only to have these separate so they're easy to identify, but also so like you're adding in like, your example with browser sync, things are kind of broken out, and they're also broken out not only with the task running itself as far as watching or task itself, but we also kind of group them in theory, by their functionality. So you'll see as we kind of go up here, starts out in this example with browser sync, build clean, runs through the style guide stuff, which we'll get into as far as the living style guide, and kind of goes through also the linting, not only for the JS and CSS, just to make sure everything's jiving together.
All right, and so we've also standardized on Sass. And so I think one of the most important points to me is actually the last bullet point on this list, which is that we have our best practice is SMAX, and I believe that's the D8 best practice. And so when you install Cog, Cog's directories are actually structured for SMAX. So so it's great, it really works well together for us. But again, since we want it to be flexible, you're not beholden to that, that file structure. And pretty much anything that you add into, any partials that you add into the Sass folder, it will get grabbed by globbing and get added to your CSS file and minimized. And so it's really flexible. And then we're using Node Sass, the Node Sass version of Loop Sass, which is supposed to be 400% faster. So that's nice, and it eliminates the need for Ruby. And then Susy is the grid system that we have by default in Cog. And the reason we like it is because it's lightweight, and unlike some of the other frameworks in grid systems, oftentimes you have to override a whole bunch, and this is completely, you have control over it. You can use as little or as much as you want. It's a light footprint, and it does the math for you. You say how many columns you want, and what your gutter width is, and it takes care of it for you. And so we have that also installed through Gulp.
Just real quick now, if you go back one, we've actually received a couple requests depending on the project as far as using a different grid system. So this is kind of in the same vein of, why we kind of layer on these things so they can be pretty easily extractable. So for example, there was a project I think like a month ago where they had their own custom grid system, right? And they had a preference with it, all their markups matched. So it was essentially a matter of just deleting one panels layout file that contained, I think, even the examples here, and maybe 12 lines of code, right? So we completely moved the grid in about 30 seconds, and then added on the grid, I think in maybe 30 minutes, their custom grid, and then it was a matter of just matching classes to like left sidebar, no sidebar, a lot of the preprocess functions as far as like matching those class schemas. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward. So that's, once again, kind of to show the point of how we layer these things on. So it's not just so deeply similar like Bootstrap or Foundation. Those are frameworks, right? So everything is intended to jive with each other for the intent of what they're doing. But ours is switchable more as far as like much less like a framework and much more a starter point. Cool. All right. Who in this room has heard of KSS Node? Out of curiosity. All right, not bad. So what we use KSS Node is, I'll kind of explain a little bit what it is. It's essentially a Node implementation of the KSS syntax to create a living style guide, right? So once again, we have it kind of embedded with the Gulp task broken out by itself. And the intent is to, as you make each change, a living style guide is literally being created. So you'll see at the bottom part, as far as like, this is a separate folder within our theme that is created automatically as you're updating. So say you're matching a component for the Drupal theme itself, it's actually updating the styling in here, and then it's a matter of also updating the markup if there is new markup, but you'll kind of see like things are broken out in that manner. A big push that we usually do is style guide consistency. So not only is it meant as a requirement from the design agency or whomever we're getting it from, it's also a measure of not only doing QA, but also kind of getting ahead of the curve, right? A common scenario, as you guys know, is see something as far as a new feature, backend development isn't due, let's say the views isn't done, something custom needs to be done with an API, you can actually go ahead within, excuse me, the living style guide, add the markup of what you're intending to use as far as the same exact twig file. Mark everything up as far as like within KSS, everything will be generated. So you're essentially building out components even before they're available from the backend. And then when it is ready, it's just a matter of just matching up that markup or just using that same twig file. And once again, it's a strong focus on consistency, just because with the CMS, you're dealing with each type of view, and there's so many ways to get so many different types of, I guess, combinations of DOM elements. So it's a way of just dynamically and just, not only retrofitting certain things, but also like making sure everyone's, consistently following. We also use a JSON file that we included an example of this as far as, I think it's in a block or a button. Yeah, right there, you'll see. And essentially the JSON file we're assigning to each component. And what that does is give you like a modifier class, but also gives you like a way to kind of execute like a key pair. If you want to try out different, classes, you can dynamically do that and just store it all in a JSON file itself. Next one, Yarn. How many of you guys have heard of Yarn? Okay, good amount. Yeah, we switched to Yarn. We were recently having a discussion, maybe going back to NPM. Once again, to reiterate, the flexibility and how we're, judging things in an agile manner. But yeah, Yarn is great. I've been really happy with it, and overall we've so essentially what Yarn is, it's a replacement for NPM as far as like updating your packages, including this in your local build. But once again, I really want to focus on the fact that not only are you using this for local development, as soon as you're issuing a pull request and Travis CI or whatever continuous integration is building the build artifact, all these same steps are being run. So as big of a deal for your local, but definitely when you're talking about 20 to 50 pull requests a day, not only counting deployments and regression testing, it's a significant improvement. So once again, it's not only just for speed, it's also there's security measures kind of built in. It definitely keeps things a lot cleaner. I don't have the metrics as far as how much faster it is. I looked at earlier, I think it was like 1 second for Yarn compared to 7 seconds for NPM, and really does a good job as far as like pinning certain versions and actually generating a yarn.lock file just to maintain the consistency as well. Another tool that we use, it's not necessarily like a front-end tool, but it's a tool we use as front-end developers, is an Acquia BLT. It's just a build and launch tool, and I'll kind of just explain what it is real quick. It's essentially like to spin up a new environment. You can run a lot of local tasks, so it'll actually sync up the database from dev or prod. So it's meant to just quickly spin up a new site. So we also have like Drupal VM running within it and a couple different dev desktop or a couple different combinations. So it's meant really as a measure of like you're starting on a project or you're jumping on a project for a day. You can spin up a brand new site, database, your aliases on the cloud are synced up immediately. Like a real quick way to kind of build it up. So that's a little bit background on Bolt, but much more of a focus is how we utilize it, right? So once again, we're utilizing it as far as continuous integration. A big thing is obviously the linting. So once again, we're building this on like a build artifact. So if we're getting like errors with a pull request in GitHub that the CI is running against, then we can kind of take a look at that. So yeah, excuse me. Another big focus is the customization of how we add in our own front-end tools and front-end tasks within Bolt. So say for example, you have the requirement of like a visual regression or like, in our government clients, accessibility, we can just add in like a Pally task as far as building that in, and then it runs on, every deployment and runs locally after just a quick refresh. So we really focus on trying to like contain those theoretically within like custom front-end tasks that are specific for the project, but we don't necessarily want baked back within Cog. It's more project specific instead of Cog specific. Another one, once again, not front-endy as much, but after I converted to Xdebug, and once again, Xdebug is just a PHP extension that allows you, just hit certain breakpoints. I use a lot with PHP Storm. It helps a lot. As far as like not only identifying variables and kind of debugging, but also like truly developing like in a rapid manner, right? So say you need to add something to an array before you need to make a renderable array. I really kind of focus on using Xdebug to kind of identify those variables. Even in this example, you'll see it's just a new class and a preprocess function, and it's quickly just hitting that breakpoint. You can kind of dive down, manipulate certain classes, roll them back up, and it's much quicker than for years I used printr, die. It's just way more, way easier to kind of follow the thread of how things are stacking, especially if you're kind of having to go back through like a custom theme function or even going back further through the bootstrap function as well. Mike actually from Lullabot just presented a really cool presentation on this, but I do want to touch on this Chrome developer tools. This is probably the most widely used thing that I've personally used for years. So we essentially use it for everything. As was noted in the other presentation, we use it for not only JavaScript debugging, but also like real-time development. So a common example would be like, say you're styling out something new as far as a block element. Sometimes I'll just type within the right-hand side as far as like adding the CSS properties and just retrofit that back into Sass, just as a measure of going like much quicker. But the debugging and the amount of as far as like inspecting actual DOM elements, copying DOM elements, and going through the common scenarios that we all kind of run into as far as like something was spec'd out in design with only 2 words. We need to like test it with 5 words. How is this going to overflow? Or are we going to hide the overflow? A lot of the scenarios quite literally are done within Chrome dev tools, and I use it, I would say almost every day. One last thing, Mike kind of mentioned this in his presentation, but just the performance auditing, we kind of incorporate, a lot of QA, let's say at the end of like a 2-week sprint or once a month, as we're doing like visual regression or performance profiling. We definitely focus on this tool as well. Cool. Okay, so let's move on to secondary tools, and we'll definitely leave plenty of time for you guys at the end to ask questions, but feel free if you want to ask questions beforehand. Cool. So as I mentioned before, the first one, Drupal VM, quick and easy way. We kind of have it built in in BLT, but you can definitely use it as a standalone. It's a really useful measure as far as getting like a local site set up, having things synced up. Everything's included with a container within Ansible, and you're ready to go. For the most part, I'd say we either use that or Dev Desktop, like for most of our builds. And once again, it's really quite useful if you're kind of jumping between projects and you need to spin up like a new VirtualBox. It's just a couple commands where, before using Ansible or Drupal VM, you had to go through like a couple manual steps at least, and a lot of configuration steps. So everything's kind of rolled up as far as the container or the stack within the container, and really easy to kind of grind through. In here has used Postman. Nice. Postman, I started using it, I want to say 6 months ago. I find it extremely useful, especially dealing with creating like proof of concepts for APIs. It supports like OAuth validation, things like that. A lot of different types of authentication, whether you're using like a get or a post. Even on the project, the client project I'm working on now, we're building a pretty extensive library of APIs. So without Postman, it'd be pretty rough. I know there's some other GUIs out there, but from what we've tested, it's been pretty useful. And I believe there's actually a Chrome extension that you can actually use it within the browser as well that I just discovered. Cool. The last one for this part of the slide is Tower. I use it as a Git GUI client. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, we use a lot of the normal Git commands as far as going through and rebasing, merging, things like that within the command line. But for me, it's much easier to kind of like review diffs, merge branches, things like that. If you have a way of, understanding the base fundamentals and kind of knowing how to translate to the GUI, for me, it's much faster to use Tower for just common things. Now, if you're dealing with like Git blame or something like that, it's not as useful. But yeah, definitely for like a lot of the common workflows, just kind of to take the thinking out of things, it's really useful.
All right, so next up is cross-browser-testing.com, and this is one that I used extensively doing boston.gov because we needed support back to IE7. We talked them out of IE6, but it's really handy because you know, there are a lot of tools out there where you can get a screenshot of what something looks like in a browser, and you often don't have access to a lot of the browsers that you need to test for. But this actually will, if you have an account, it will just spin it up, and you can visit your website through it and walk through critical processes, make sure things degrade gracefully, and get some real testing in there, not just guesswork. It also has inspectors and debugging tools, which you also wouldn't get with just a screenshot service. So webpagetest.org, you can add in a URL there too, and it will evaluate your page load time, and it will give you a nice breakdown in a graphic of what different assets are taking up your page load time, and so you can see how things are performing. And additionally, caniuse.com was another one that we used a lot on boston.gov, needing to support older browsers, because you can go and you can enter a CSS style, and it will actually give you a table like you can see in the screenshot, and it will tell you what browsers support it. So I wonder what this one says. Read it, but you know, for example, if you needed rounded corners, which we had some on boston.gov, and that's only supported from IE 11, I think, and so you kind of get a forecast of how your design is going to translate into older browsers.
Cool. Yeah, we wanted to allow enough time, I think, to kind of get feedback as far as like tools that you guys use, tools you've maybe vetted, you may not use, but you've heard of, because, you know, as we mentioned before, iteration process as far as like what makes sense for the client, but also for our front-end tools, you know, within the team. Obviously, we deal with a lot of partners and clients of every, you know, shape, color, and style. We've looked at a lot, and we've currently I think we have 4 or 5 kind of on the docket to review. So I'd love to hear if you guys have like any suggestions or things, experiences with your tools, or any questions obviously about anything we've kind of presented on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm having a serious problem with Vagrant and Docker right now. Have you guys run that? Like I want to use Voxel and I'm running anything on Vagrant, there are these shared resources that just crashes. So I wonder if you had to work on them.
Not that I've come across. I know we've used Docker in a couple different VM scenarios. A lot of times with it's something as simple as the resourcing, because obviously they use a bunch of resources. So whether you have like Ansible spinning up Drupal VM and utilizing it for it, I've seen that as well, but not as far as like directly Docker, other than just resources. The Mac I had before would essentially like a certain amount of time with VM, but I've noticed like more memory with the other Mac I have, it seems to handle it a little bit better. Yes, sir.
What's sort of the decision making for when you use it or you don't?
That's a really good question. I think we usually start out by everyone sending out the link, everyone reviewing it for, you know, a little bit of time, and trying to see like, does this make sense for my project? For a project that, you know, maybe we worked on 6 months ago, and kind of like draw by committee, right? Like there's not like one voice that's like, okay, we're definitely using it or not. We essentially vote on it, but we really judge it more by like the usefulness of it and how it will scale as well, right? So if it's something that, yeah, it's cool, but it doesn't really make things that much faster, and then you have to learn and incorporate, then we kind of push it to the side saying, yeah, maybe not now. I think that's a lot of it too, but I think it's essentially like judging a bit by how not only efficient it is, but how quickly someone can also get ramped up. Because once again, we're not just talking about our internal team, we're talking about tons of different partners that we're essentially saying, here's what we use. I know you just started, can you please, you know, get this going and kind of run with it. So that's a lot of it too, as far as like really judging the efficiency and how extensible we can make it, but also honestly how solid it is. Like for all these different types of projects, if it's like a really big gnarly project, like is it gonna time out? Is Gulp gonna crap out on us? If we're like running too many tasks, things like that.
So managing a project like this, we do this something very similar where I work. Seems like it never fails, even if like we in our package.json file, we'll go back to like maybe minor version, and like we'll pull in new minor versions because they're supposed to be non-breaking, but at least twice a year, a minor version actually breaks something. So just like, how do you manage the dependencies? Do you evaluate it before you create a new like release version, or is it just like you pull in?
Yeah, I'll say that Yarn's helped a lot with that, right? Because Yarn, you're actually pinning things to actual releases instead of like, you know, like a version number or a wildcard. We were running into much more issues that way as far as before using Yarn and locking it down with the Yarn lock file. As far as like, I guess the process generally before a release, even if we're updating the packages themselves, like let's say we want to kind of upgrade everything at once, we generally just run it through like the whole workflow, right? Like Travis CI integration, you're kind of going back and making sure nothing, you know, is going crazy with like KSS node, you know, Gulp is fine, not really throwing any errors. And we really kind of judge it according to that. But we definitely are kind of moving more into the mode of getting the newer versions and trying to pinning those just to make sure they're kind of jiving with each other. But yeah, we run into that a lot, honestly. So we're a little hesitant to update really frequently. We kind of pin it down to like version, or like maybe every 3 months we'll kind of review to make sure and repin certain versions that it works. Yes, sir.
So how do you educate teams with something like KSS Node and Style Guide? Say, oh, we have KSS Node installed. We can check off that box.
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
So how do you educate people to get on the same page and actually use Style Guide?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, a lot of it is just reiterating kind of like our MO as far as like consistency, because, you know, sometimes things are done not in parallel with the dev. So we're like really, like in the KSS Node example, project out by saying, this is what we're using. This is how we're finding its usefulness, and it's a little more of like a sales hook that way, to where they're at least interested in kind of reiterating through the different sprints, like this is why we're using it, right? Like say we're incorporating a new functionality, well, we're really focusing on building it out, sometimes in the style guide first, to show its usefulness. Because, you know, like we're all creatures of habit, right? Like we're all used to using the same tools, and if, you know, you're essentially saying, I know you're kind of used to working at this pace, but here's something to make it more complicated. You know, like we've run into that, and it's kind of like the same thing. You're like, okay, well, I guess we're using it, but I'm going to kind of ignore it. A lot of it is just reiterating the purposefulness of why we're using it, and just communicate it within the confines of like that tool, and saying, okay, what did you see as far as like when you were updating the style guide? Did you see the consistency with the markup, or do we need to break this out in a Sass partial so it's easier to understand as you're kind of like delineating it down? Great. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's not really a question.
Yes.
This goes back to something that you said, and you're talking about browser sync, and then you asked like process suggestions or tips on like what we use.
Yeah.
One thing that we found very helpful is we just include a local.js file, and then it's get ignored. Like variables like browser sync paths or port numbers or whatever, you can do it in there. So then, because it's get ignored, you can have yours, they won't override each other, and then you can just pull like those bars, like it just overrides variable paths or whatever.
Gotcha. So do you generally, like, when someone starts doing the project, you share what you're doing and they match
so
up?
like if you pull down like our starter toolkit or whatever, and it is a local.js.example file, then you can copy that into local.js or whatever, and then it's got all the bars in it, and then you can just override which ones you need, remove the ones that you don't, and then, yeah, like, just like you, I'm sure our starter is well documented. So.
Yeah, that's a big, I'm glad you brought that up, because the big focus too is not only us providing documentation within Cog, we actually have a whole separate subfolder full of readmes that provide snippets for a lot of different scenarios that we run into. Kind of like your earlier question with, you know, like how do we vet out the process? We kind of did the same thing with like an internal theming guide. So it's not only like a snippet repository, which it kind of is, but also like a way of referencing examples that we've seen. You know, it could be something as simple as like, say you're doing a preprocess on like a couple fields, like adding a counter so you can automatically add the Susy grids. Examples like that, we kind of incorporated that. And it makes it easier to like have one central place, but also like obviously a public GitHub repo that you can point people directly to as far as a link instead of like a myriad of snippets and examples like that. So a lot of it is just, none of us like doing documentation, but allowing yourself to have good documentation allows you to save a lot of time as far as reiterating and answering the same questions. So it's also a measure, kind of going back to the topic of communication. Yes, sir.
So what do you think front-end development tools will look like in 5 years?
Tom.
Yeah. Well, by then I'll be completely gray, I'm sure, from all the different tools that we would have tried before then. I think it'll be much more, I think it'll even be more opinionated than it is now, right? Because like you can decouple things to a certain level and you can make things not as dependent on each other, but it really kind of comes down to like, this is what I'm used to using. Liz, are you used to using this? Like, okay, you're not, well, then you're off to your path and I'm. So a lot of it is just, I think it'll even get more opinionated. Like standards is thrown around a lot, right? Like it's like a very general type of thing. And I think like maybe things will be more standardized, but I think it'll be definitely leaning much more on the path of set opinions. Cool. Well, if you guys don't have any more questions, here's the links up here. Linked, Twitter. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to contact us or talk to us after this. We have another presentation in a couple hours, so we have some time too if you guys want to chat.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And minimize window has to be maximized now, so we can stop the recording. Sure. Is this the right one?
Yep.
Where's the stop recording button?
Oh, did this open another window? Oh, right here. Sorry. Stop sharing at the bottom.
So we want to actually end the Hangout
Okay, yeah.
and not just stop sharing the screen.
Yep. Pause. Oh.
Edge question. Not just a mouse. A toolkit. Anything that looks like developing, like making websites, type of augmented reality.
No, yeah, I know that in our Acquia labs, they're doing a lot
There
with
we
like